Hello guys, welcome back to a new episode of Teen Talks. We're here at still TEDx. I know it's been a long day, a lot of episodes. Could you please introduce yourself to the audience?
Sim. I'm Charlene LAM. I am an artist and a curator and the founder of the Grief Gallery. I create spaces and I make space for grief, usually death-related grief, but also grief is more than just death, which is challenging one of the myths about grief.
Charlene, right?
Charlene.
Charlene. Could you just give a brief summary of what you spoke today in your talk?
Sure. The working title for my TEDx talk is Grief Taught Me How to Hold Lightly and to Live in Full Color. Because I think usually when we think of grief, we think dark, heavy, painful. And of course, loss is painful, but I also believe that grief can be beautiful. It can be creative. It can help us to live a better life. So that was the approach that I was going for.
So, on your talk, you spoke about the grief of your mother dying and stuff. So what do you think inspired you to take maybe another way to grief, like this more creative way instead of the traditional part of like just being sad, throw away stuff? What inspired you to take this more creative route?
I found that personally, I didn't grieve in the way that you see in movies. I'm not a very big crier. So my mother died very suddenly. So when I got the news that she had died, it turned out it was a stroke. I cried in the moment that I found out, and then I didn't really cry for at least a year. I think maybe even the first 2 years. And I had the kinds of questions that a lot of people do of, am I grieving right? Am I doing it wrong? Am I a bad daughter? Why aren't I grieving in a way that people expect? But I found that looking back, I was grieving in my own way. That very early on, I was listening to my instincts to say, you know what, maybe you want to put on a sad song and you want to dance to it. Or I do art. I use design in my grief work because my instinct was to say, you know what, I want to do an exhibition about my mother. That's what I was already doing for work in London. So, but I was working with artists and designers. But my instinct said, I want to do an exhibition about my mother using her belongings. And it didn't make sense, right? Logically.
But it didn't make sense like this. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So when I decided to help other people, I said, okay, let me look at why this was so helpful for me. And clearly, what's expected is not necessarily what's best for everyone. Yeah.
But I know you said it's not best for everyone, but by the sounds of it, it sounds very healthy compared to other types of grief. Why do you think maybe therapists or nurses don't take this type of route maybe of maybe take it to a more creative way, put in a dance, put in an art exhibition or this kind of stuff?
I think we're improving. We are improving. After COVID, there was a lot more interest in grief. So my hope is that younger people will get exposed to a lot more ways to approach grief and death than I did growing up and that a lot of people did. So we are learning also so much about grief. All the things that we assume about 5 stages of grief, it's all based on very old research or misunderstandings. So the last 10 years, 30 years, we've seen all these advancements in our understandings of grief. So Mary Frances O'Connor, if you're a book person, her books, The Grieving Brain and The Grieving Body just came out, are amazing resources about the neuroscience of grief and how we're learning so much about how grief affects our brain, how grief affects our bodies, and yes, how helpful things like ways to move our body, different ways to experience and process it. We're learning so much about it. So I'm like, young people, learn with us. Don't get stuck with the old knowledge. Yeah.
So just a question about your history. Would you, before your mother's death, were you working in the arts or something completely different?
I was working as an independent curator. So that's why the exhibitions make sense. So I was working in London helping creative people to show and sell their work. So I would curate pop-up exhibitions, like showing their ceramics or their jewelry. So that's why it made sense for me to put on an exhibition about my mother. But looking back too, I'm like, oh, this goes way back. Yes, it's art and design, but it's really about stories and it's about storytelling.
Yeah.
So I wanted to be a journalist when I was younger. I was the editor of my high school newspaper. I was editor of my college newspaper. And that's what I thought I was going to do.
Yeah.
And then I thought, oh, I did something totally different. And no, now I did something totally different. But really, when I look back, all those threads come together, right? It's storytelling, it's working with objects, it's finding different ways to tell stories and narratives. So if as a young person you're thinking, oh my God, I need to pick one path and like decide what's going to happen for the rest of my life, I've found that's not the case. All that we do can help to create what our life might look like and what our work might look like.
So, just a final question to end the interview. What advice you would give to young people to deal with grief? What's your way? What advice you would give?
To give yourself some grace. Serious. Because we judge ourselves so harshly. And the pain of loss is heavy enough. And I find that we burden ourselves with that extra judgment. I need to finish this. I need to go back to school. I need to get through this faster. If I just study grief hard enough, I'll get done with it faster. Give yourself that grace. And when we think of 2 years, some people might think, oh, 2 years, like, aren't you over it already? No. With major loss, 2 years is very recent. And really, when you lose a mother, when you lose a parent, when you lose a spouse, a sibling, a pet, you might experience grief throughout your life. And nothing's wrong with you. So give yourself that grace to be human and to experience grief.
So, could you please talk to book you've been holding the the entire interview? I'm really curious about it.
So I self-published this book end of last year, and it's called Curating Grief because my approach to grief is all about using this lens of curating in exhibitions. It's about my experience of losing my mother and going through all of her belongings, but it's really about using this lens of curating to access emotions and to process grief. It has a bottle of soy sauce on the cover, which makes no sense to some people, but it makes total sense to me, and it makes total sense to the people I'm speaking to. Okay? That you might understand that soy sauce is related to culture. Grief is related to culture and our different identities. So if you want some support, if you want some insights, if you want some funny stories about my mom, that's what I'm hoping to offer.
Read the book, guys. See you next time. Bye-bye.